The Vorath science vessel, measured calm, had been mapping the Outer Karev corridor for 14 months when it found the ship. It was not supposed to be there. The corridor was unregistered deep space, far from any established trade route, far from any colonial boundary, far from anything that appeared on any chart the Vorath Cartographic Institute had issued in the last 40 years. The measured calm had been sent precisely because nothing was supposed to be there, and the Institute had a philosophy about the word supposed. It was a word that invited verification. What the long-range array found at 3:40 ship time was a metallic object of significant mass, stationary, no visible propulsion activity, no broadcast signal of any kind. It sat at the edge of the array's reliable range, and it sat there the way things sat there when they had been sitting there for a long time. Senior analyst Thuron was the one who saw it first. He had the 300 watch, which was the quietest watch and the one that junior analysts considered a punishment posting, and that he had been voluntarily taking for 11 years, because the quiet was when the interesting readings came through. He had a cup of something warm on the console, and a personal reading on the secondary screen, and the array output running on the primary. And he looked at the primary screen at 3:41 and put down the cup and sat forward. He spent 12 minutes running verification checks before he woke anyone else. This was standard procedure and also personal temperament. Thuron had spent 23 years in deep space cartographic work, and he had learned early that the first reading was frequently the most dramatic and least accurate reading, and that 12 minutes of verification produced a much more interesting result than immediate action. The verification confirmed the object. He woke Captain Save. She came onto the bridge in 3 minutes, which told him everything about what kind of captain she was. She looked at the array output and looked at the verification log and looked at him with the expression of someone who has been briefed accurately and is now processing the implications. She asked what the mass estimate put it at. He told her, mid-range warship class. The estimate had a wide error band at this range, but the lower bound of the estimate was still significant. She asked about the signal profile. He told her, nothing, no transponder, no distress beacon, no navigational ping, complete radio silence across all monitored frequencies. She stood at the console for a moment with her hands at her sides, thinking with the focused quality that Thuron had come to recognize over 4 years of working under her command, as the specific thinking she did. When a situation had moved outside the category she had planned for, and she was constructing a new category in real time. Then she requested a closer approach, reduced speed, full passive sensor array. He told her, if we move to passive sensor range, we will be within their detection envelope as well, assuming they have functional systems. She acknowledged that. They moved anyway. It took 6 hours to reach passive sensor range. 6 hours of the measured calm running quiet, minimum broadcast, reduced engine output, moving through the dark corridor the way you moved through a space you were not certain about. What the passive array returned at close range was more information than Thuron had processed in a single reading in 11 years of 300 watches. The ship was large, larger than the initial mass estimate had suggested, because the initial reading had not accounted for the object's profile orientation relative to the array. It was sitting at an angle that had presented a smaller cross-section to the long-range scan. At passive range, with the full array working, the actual dimensions resolved into something that sat in Thuron's mind with a specific weight. It was a warship. The configuration was unlike anything in the Vorath Cartographic Institute's vessel registry, which covered 47 species and several thousand individual vessel classes across 2 centuries of compiled records. It was not Vorath. It was not any of the 11 species in the Outer Karev trading network. It was not anything the registry recognized. The hull was dark, not powered down dark, not the darkness of a ship running silent. It was the darkness of age. Whatever coating the hull had originally carried had been through a very long time and a very cold environment, and had come out the other side of both as something that absorbed sensor contact in a way that was not a design feature but a consequence. The ship was very old. He ran the age estimation 3 times using 3 different methods. The results clustered around the same range. He looked at that range for a while before he brought it to the captain. She looked at it. She looked at him. She asked whether he was confident in the methodology. He told her, "The 3 methods are independent. They agree within acceptable variance. I am as confident as the data allows." She looked at the number again. Then she called for a full crew briefing. There were 9 people on the measured comm. They gathered in the main compartment, and Thuron walked them through the readings and the verification checks and the age estimation methodology, and the 3 independent results that clustered around the same number. He was precise, and he was complete, and he did not editorialize, because the data was already doing everything that editorializing would have done and doing it more effectively. When he finished the briefing, the compartment was quiet with a specific quality. It was not the quiet of people waiting to speak. It was the quiet of people sitting with something that required sitting with before speaking was possible. Navigator Aish was the first to find her way through it. She asked, "No life signs?" He confirmed. The bioscan returned nothing. No thermal signatures consistent with biological activity. No atmospheric processing. No movement. Her next question was quieter, and the hull integrity. He told her, "Remarkably good. Sections of the outer hull show stress fracturing consistent with the age estimate and with prolonged deep space exposure. But the core structure is intact. The internal compartments, as far as passive scan can resolve, are sealed." She thought about that for a moment. Then, sealed from the inside or the outside? He had been waiting for that question. He told her, "The sealing pattern on the primary and secondary airlocks is consistent with deliberate closure from the interior. Whatever closed those locks did so from inside the ship." The compartment absorbed that information the way it had been absorbing information since the briefing began. Slowly and completely, the way you absorbed something that did not fit cleanly into any existing category, and therefore had to build its own. Medical Officer Ran, who had not spoken yet, raised a point from the back. "The age estimate. You used the word age. Are we discussing the age of the hull materials or the age of the vessel in its current position?" Thuron had prepared for this one too. He told her, "Both. The hull material degradation and the positional drift estimate from the surrounding debris microfield are consistent with the same age range. The ship is not recent construction that has been sitting here a short time. It is old construction that has been sitting here a long time. Both measurements point to the same period." Ran was quiet for a moment. Then, what period? He told her the number. The compartment was quiet again, but differently this time. The first quiet had been processing. This one was something closer to adjustment. When you gave people a number that large, the first quiet was always processing, and the second was always adjustment. And Thuron had learned in 23 years not to rush either one. Captain Save stood at the front of the briefing with her hands folded and let the information settle before she spoke. When she did speak, she was direct. She told them, "We are a science and cartographic vessel. We are not equipped for boarding operations or for first contact protocol above the basic level. Our mandate covers documentation and preliminary assessment only. We document everything. We transmit the full record to the Institute and to the Concord Relay at Karev Station. We do not board. We do not attempt contact. We map the exterior completely, and we record everything the passive array can give us, and we do not go closer than passive sensor range." She looked around the compartment. She asked whether anyone had questions about that framework. Nobody had questions about that framework. They spent 4 days mapping the exterior of the ship. Thuron spent most of those 4 days at his console, running the array data, through every analytical framework the ship systems carried and several that he constructed himself from first principles during the long middle hours of the watch cycle. What he built over 4 days was the most complete passive scan record of an unknown vessel that the Vorath Cartographic Institute would receive in its 200-year history, and he knew it while he was building it, which was a feeling he had not had before, and which he treated with the same precision he brought to everything else. The ship's external configuration told several stories simultaneously. The weapons systems were visible, not in an aggressive sense, not in the sense of a ship presenting a threat posture, visible in the sense that the design incorporated them structurally in a way that made them part of the ship's architecture rather than additions to it. Whatever species had built this vessel had built it from the beginning as a fighting ship. The weapons were not bolted on. They were grown in. The propulsion array, as far as could be assessed from exterior scan, was a configuration that the Institute's engineering division would later spend considerable time analyzing. It was not recognizable as any known drive system. It was large relative to the vessel's mass in a way that suggested performance characteristics the Institute's analysts would describe, carefully and with appropriate hedging, as significant. On the third day, Thuron found the markings. They were on the ventral hull, partially obscured by the layered age of the surface, but present under the right array frequency. A sequence of symbols, regular and intentional, the kind of marking that a vessel carried to identify itself. He ran the symbol set against the Institute's registry of known written languages, which covered 61 species and approximately 400 documented written systems. The registry returned a partial match. Not a complete match, not a confident identification. A partial match on a subset of the symbol forms that pointed toward a language cluster the registry flagged as human-derived script variants, specifically a technical notation system used in early conquered survey and military vessel marking. The confidence level on the match was moderate. The registry was clear that moderate confidence on a partial match against a 400-system database was not an identification. It was a direction. He brought it to Captain Save at the end of the third day. She looked at the partial match report for a long time. She was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was thinking carefully rather than thinking quickly. Her first observation: if this is accurate, the age estimate becomes a more significant problem. He agreed. If the partial match was correct, if the vessel was human-built or human-affiliated in its origin, then the age estimate placed its construction in a period that predated significant human deep space activity by a margin that the historical record did not account for. The margin was not small. It was the kind of margin that rewrote the premise of the question rather than answering it. She asked, "What do you want to do with this?" He told her, "I want to transmit everything to the Institute and to the Conquered relay simultaneously. I want the Human Conquered Records Division to see the partial match report specifically." She approved the transmission without hesitation. The transmission reached Karev Station in 11 hours. The duty officer at the relay, a Vorath administrator named Kors, read the header summary and escalated immediately to the station director, who read the full transmission and escalated to the Conquered Outer Sector Records Division. The Records Division received the transmission on a morning that became, for the analyst who opened it, the kind of morning that people in that role talk about for the rest of their careers. Her name was Analyst Marin. She had been in the Records Division for 8 years. She specialized in pre-colonial era documentation, which was a specialty that most of her colleagues regarded with the specific respect given to work that was important, methodical, and very rarely exciting. She opened the measured comm transmission at 800. She read the header. She read the passive scan summary. She read the age estimation with its 3 independent methodology results clustering around the same number. She read the exterior configuration analysis. She read the weapons system description. She read the partial match report on the hull markings. She sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled the conquered pre-colonial vessel registry. It was not a heavily accessed database. Most of the records in it were incomplete, reconstructed from fragmentary sources, or flagged with confidence levels that made them useful as historical curiosities rather than operational references. The pre-colonial period was, by definition, the period before the record-keeping became systematic, and the records reflected that. She searched the registry for vessels matching the exterior configuration parameters the measured COM had documented: size class, propulsion array geometry, weapons integration architecture. The search returned 3 possible matches. All 3 were flagged as unconfirmed. All 3 were from the same historical period. All 3 carried the same notation in the registry comments field, entered by a historian who had compiled the record 40 years earlier and had added a note that read, "Vessel class unverified. Construction predates confirmed human deep space capability by significant margin. Source documentation reliability rated low. Included for completeness." Marin looked at those 3 registry entries for a long time. Then she wrote a report. It was not a long report. It did not need to be long because the facts were the facts and the facts were clear, and the appropriate response to clear facts was to present them clearly rather than to pad them with language that made clarity harder to find. The report read, "The measured COM-P. A sieve scan record is consistent with 3 pre-colonial era vessel registry entries of disputed historicity. If the partial match on hull markings is confirmed, the vessel in the Outer Karev corridor is a human-built warship of pre-colonial construction that has been stationary in deep space for a period consistent with its age estimation. Internal compartments are sealed from the inside. No life signs detected. The vessel is intact." She sent the report to her division director, with a recommendation that the conquered Human Historical Records Division be brought in immediately, and that the measured COM be requested to maintain its current position and documentation protocol until a specialized team could reach the corridor. She flagged the report urgent. It was the first time in 8 years she had flagged anything urgent. The division director read the report in 40 minutes. He forwarded it up the chain with his endorsement in another 20. By the end of that day, the Concord had authorized a specialist response team composed of a human historian, a xenoarchaeologist, and a technical assessment crew, with a transit time to the Outer Karev corridor of 9 days. The historian's name was Dr. Imara Solis. She had spent 22 years studying the pre-colonial period of human expansion, which was an area of study that the broader academic community treated as important but inconclusive, because the records were fragmentary and the physical evidence was almost entirely absent. Ships from that period did not survive. Stations from that period did not survive. The pre-colonial era was known almost entirely through documents and reconstructions, and the careful work of people like Imara, who spent careers building a picture from pieces that were never quite enough to make the picture complete. She read the measured COM file on the first day of the 9-day transit. She read the passive scan record. She read the age estimation. She read the exterior configuration analysis and the weapons systems description and the propulsion array geometry. She read the partial match report on the hull markings. She had been in the field for 22 years, and she had learned not to let the gap between what the evidence suggested and what she could confirm drive her to conclusions the evidence did not support. That discipline had served her well across 2 decades of fragmentary records and incomplete physical evidence. She sat with the measured COM file for 3 days of the 9-day transit, reading it in sections and setting it down and returning to it and reading it again, building the picture carefully the way she had always built pictures. On the 4th day, she called her research assistant and told him to pull every pre-colonial vessel record the division had. Every one, including the ones flagged as low confidence, including the reconstructions, including the ones that other historians had set aside as too speculative to include in the standard literature. He asked how far back. She told him, as far as the records go. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that is a significant pull. She confirmed, I know, do it anyway. He did it. She spent the remaining 5 days of transit reading records that she had read before and records she had not, building a framework that was not yet a conclusion, but was beginning to have the shape of one. What the pre-colonial records described, in fragments and reconstructions and low-confidence sources that had been set aside by careful historians for reasonable methodological reasons, was a period of human deep space activity that the standard historical account did not include, not because the historians had ignored it, because the evidence for it had never been strong enough to include in a standard account. The fragments were too few and too scattered, and too easily explained by other interpretations. But if the measured comms readings were accurate, the fragments were pointing at something real. The specialist team reached the Outer Karev corridor on day 9. The measured comm was exactly where it had been, holding position at passive sensor range, the crew having spent 9 more days adding to what was already the most complete passive scan record of an unknown vessel in the Institute's history. Thuron met the specialist team at the docking port with the complete documentation archive on a transfer drive. He handed it to Dr. Solis without preamble. She accepted it with both hands. She spent 2 hours with the archive before she went to look at the ship. Those 2 hours were not reading time. She had read the archive 3 times on transit. The 2 hours were the time she spent sitting with what the archive meant now that she was in physical proximity to the thing the archive described. There was a particular quality to being a historian that most people outside the discipline did not fully understand. It was the quality of living simultaneously in 2 time periods. Odds, you spent your professional life inside a period that no one else was inside anymore, building it from fragments and reconstructions and documents, whose reliability you had assessed so many times you knew their weaknesses the way you knew your own. You knew the shape of the evidence. You knew where the gaps were. You knew which fragments pointed at things the standard account had not included, because the standard of evidence that justified inclusion had not been met. For 22 years, Imara had known where the gap was. The gap was here. It had been here the whole time, sitting in the dark of the Outer Karev corridor, waiting for someone to come far enough out to find it. She sat with that for 2 hours. When she finally stood at the viewport and looked at it, she was quiet for a long time. The ship sat in the dark of the corridor the way it had been sitting for longer than she wanted to say out loud, until she had more than a partial match and an age estimate, and a registry entry flagged as low confidence. Her technical assessment lead, a woman named Dr. Petra, came to stand beside her. Petra specialized in hull materials and structural analysis, and had been brought specifically because of her work on degradation patterns in deep space exposed metals. She had reviewed the passive scan data on transit and had her own conclusions, and she was not the kind of person who held conclusions back when they were ready to be stated. She was direct. The degradation pattern is real. The age estimate methodology is sound. I have reviewed Thuron's work and I would have done it the same way. Imara kept her eyes on the ship. Then the number holds. It holds, Petra confirmed, within variance, but it holds. Imara was quiet for another moment. Petra pressed carefully, you have a theory. It is not a theory yet, Imara answered. It is a direction. What direction? Imara considered how to say it precisely. She told her, the pre-colonial record has always had a gap. The standard account says humans developed deep space capability at a certain point, and before that point there was nothing. But the fragmentary sources have always suggested the gap was not empty. They were set aside because the evidence was insufficient. If this ship is what the partial match suggests it might be, the evidence just became significantly less insufficient. Petra absorbed that. Then, what was in the gap? Imara turned from the viewport. She told her, "That is what we are going to find out." The boarding assessment took 3 days of planning and 2 days of execution. The airlocks, sealed from the inside as Thuron's scan had identified, required a bypass approach that Petra's team developed by analyzing the sealing mechanism through the external sensor record. It was careful, methodical work. Petra ran 3 simulations before she attempted the physical bypass, and she ran the 3rd simulation twice, because the second result had a variable she wanted to eliminate before she was willing to call it confirmed. The bypass worked. The outer airlock opened. The inner airlock opened on its own. Not automatically, not triggered by the outer opening. It opened 7 seconds after the outer lock cleared, from the inside, with a deliberateness that the team's sensors recorded clearly. 7 seconds was not a mechanical delay. 7 seconds was a response time. Something inside the ship had registered the outer lock clearing and had made a decision about the inner one. Nobody moved for a moment. The 7 seconds sat in the corridor the way certain silences sat, heavy and specific and belonging to a category that did not have a standard name. Thuron, who had come with the specialist team as documentation lead, checked his sensor array. The internal readings were unchanged. No biosignatures, no thermal activity, no movement that the sensors could detect. Whatever had opened the inner lock had not tripped any of the readings that would indicate a living thing doing it. He reported this to Imara quietly. She absorbed it, then she moved forward. The interior of the ship was cold. Not the cold of deep space, but the cold of a sealed environment that had been managing its own temperature for a very long time with whatever resources it had left. The lighting was low, emergency level, running on a power source that had been sustaining that level for longer than emergency lighting was designed to sustain anything. The corridors were human scale. The dimensions, the ceiling height, the width, the placement of handholds and equipment fixtures, all of it was built for human bodies. Imara moved through it with the specific feeling of someone who had spent 22 years reading descriptions of places and was now standing inside one. The ship was not empty. They found the crew in the command section, not biological remains, not the evidence of crew that had been there once and was not there anymore. The crew of the ship was present in the most ch-nickel sense of the word present, in a state that the ship's own systems had been maintaining for the duration of the long wait in the dark corridor. Preservation systems, old ones built into the ship's core architecture in a way that suggested they were not emergency equipment but standard design. The crew had not been surprised by what happened to them. They had prepared for it. There were 41 of them. 41 human crew members in a state of preservation that the ship's systems had been sustaining, on whatever power remained, for the full length of the age estimate. On the command console, in a notation system that the partial match on the hull markings had partially identified and that Imara could now read with confidence, there was a log entry. It was the last entry in the system. It was brief. It read, "We are too far out and the drive is gone and we cannot get back on our own. We have enough power to wait or to signal and not enough for both. We chose to wait. If you are reading this, you found us. We did not doubt that you would. Bring us home." Imara read it 3 times. Then she opened a channel to the measured comm, and she kept her voice level the way you kept your voice level, when the thing you were saying was too large for any other register. She reported, "The crew is intact. 41 personnel. Preservation systems active and functional. We need a medical extraction team, and we need the best restoration specialists the Concord has. And we need someone to tell me how to wake them up gently after this long, because I am not going to be the person who brings them back badly after they waited this well." The measured comms communications officer relayed the message to care of station within the minute. The response from the conquered came in 4 hours. It authorized a full medical extraction mission. It authorized the restoration support team. It authorized whatever Imara needed. At the bottom of the authorization, added by whoever had processed the request at the relay end, was a single line that was not standard authorization language. It read, "Tell them we are coming." Imara went back to the command console. She added a new entry below the last one. She wrote, in the same notation system, because it seemed correct to answer in the language they had left the message in. "We read you, we are coming, you waited well." Then she went to work.